Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2 p.m. session of Bytes Cloud Security Week. This particular session is around securing hybrid and multi-cloud, best practices in security posture, network security, and identity. So, why are we here this week? We strongly believe that Bytes, that every cloud is unique. So there's never going to be a one size fits all for security in those circumstances. So we thought about bringing together 9 diverse sessions on securing different elements of cloud, and try to bring together a few security leaders, both from an individual sense and a vendor sense, to talk about those different elements of the network. What we're going to try and do is obviously keep it as interactive as possible. There'll be a few Q&As, a few short polls to make sure we haven't digressed from the sessions, so that we can share some insights and also give the opportunity to ask some live questions from some of the feeds. We've covered yesterday cloud fundamentals on day 1. And today is day 2, where we're concentrating on public and, of course, hybrid cloud. And tomorrow, hopefully, we'll see some more of you join us for day 3, concentrate on cloud applications. If you are interested in a later session but not registered, or you've missed one, no problem at all. Dial back in later this week, or watch on demand, as we'll be uploading these sessions, hopefully, at the end of each day, so that people can view them the following day. For those of you who may have seen some of the earlier sessions, forgive me for the first of the housekeeping jokes, which is make sure you know where your fire exits are. In all seriousness, there will be polls and questions throughout, so keep your eyes open and peeled for those. There'll be interaction on the screen. You'll also be sent a recording to watch at your leisure. And of course, either during and after, we absolutely encourage feedback to make sure that we get these events as interesting, exciting, interactive as possible. And there'll also be some vouchers available following the feedback survey. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeremy Edwards. I'm Head of Corporate and Enterprise Security at Bytes, running the security overlay team into the account managers. I'm joined today by Gennaro, who is Head of Solutions Development at Bytes. And I'm also joined by Stuart Green and James Richmond from Checkpoint and Okta, respectively. Through the session, I'll give you a very brief intro to the Bytes Security Division. I will then hand over to Stuart, who will talk to us about network security and workload best practices. We'll then have a short poll and Q&A. So do please keep your questions coming in throughout the session. We'll then move over to James Richmond to talk about balancing end user experience and security, with a further Q&A, and then followed by Gennaro, who will talk about how Bytes are looking to help customers in a number of these different areas. We'll then be followed by a very short opportunity for people to ask questions to the full panel. So for those of you who don't know Bytes particularly well, or have perhaps looked at these sessions as an opportunity to learn more about Bytes and where we sit in the security landscape, we've actually been an active partner for 20 years. And along the way towards the Bytes merger this year, we started cementing our position within the channel marketplace as one of the leaders, culminating in delivering around about £100 million worth of security projects last year. But as we look forward to the future, we're certainly looking to deliver more and more of those services to customers in the areas that need them most. So as of today, what does the security division actually look like? Well, within the Bytes group, we actually have 65 security specialists in various different areas, 15 security experts looking into various different areas. Some are generalists, some are definitely focused on key areas of security within our customers. And then we're very well supported by 20 pre and post-sales consultants who have various different expertise across a number of different security areas. We currently hold over 100 plus security partnerships with various different technologies, and have spent the mainstay of our last 20 years really leading the line of supporting customers with third line engineer support. We're now sort of able to build on that by providing certified cyber consulting, and are ever increasing our ability to provide comprehensive managed security solutions. Just to give you a brief overview of where we now see ourselves sitting. Many of you will be well aware of the procurement services and potentially the 24/7 support that we're providing to customers. However, with the introduction and growing element of cyber consulting, we're now able to help organizations look at the full life cycle of security and strategy management, and understand a little bit more about their own maturity, both in technology, policy, people, and the way in which they support their own IT development services from a security perspective. So it'd be great to see more customers look to take hold of that full cycle that Bytes are now able to provide. So what are we really looking to explore and solve or ask questions about with hybrid and multi-cloud? From our perspective, there's potentially some challenges around what I've come to call development blindness from the digitization inertia that certainly we've been, I guess, accustomed to over the last 18 months. So we're all on this, what you might call the consumption winds of change, where the market is also providing various different areas for us to move, but very, very rapidly. And I think the key thing to understand is that inertia is affecting all of us. So my cloud or your cloud might be the very question we're all asking when trying to find where our assets are indeed today. SecOps and DevOps are perhaps living in different dimensions. It's really important to understand that many businesses today are really, really increasingly set on the diversity and adaptability of their business to survive, and no more so than the last, as I say, 18 months where we've looked to diversify offerings across different digital platforms, and give our businesses a chance to really thrive in very different circumstances. So we've seen that huge difference. But why is that so much of a challenge, and what does it mean for all organizations today? Well, the reality is that by adopting hybrid cloud networks and adopting more and more external services, we're effectively now living in the day of the zero-day network. Every network you attach yourself to or log into in the morning might be very different from the network you actually see yourselves exiting at the end of the day. Never more so in all those environments that are brought together. So let's have a quick poll. Make sure we know who's awake, who's still around. Excellent. So most people believe you can't get enough coffee. Fantastic. Well, without further ado, I'm going to move over to Stuart Green, who's going to be taking us through the first session of today. Stuart.
Thank you very much. I concur, there is definitely never enough coffee, at least not in my tiny little office. Thank you for joining this session, guys. Apologies if you're getting sick of hearing from me. This is the third session that I've been on today. This session, we are going to talk a little bit about hybrid cloud deployments and how we can help to secure them and some of the architecture patterns that we see when we're talking to our customers. So what is a hybrid cloud? It's one of these terms that people talk about a lot. It might be that not everybody is fully aware of just exactly what a hybrid cloud is. We're going to go through a couple of the common deployments that we have within Checkpoint with some of our technology and how best to architect these environments to secure hybrid cloud approaches. So what is hybrid cloud? Now, it's something which sounds quite fancy, but to make sure everyone's on the same level, a hybrid cloud is basically the idea of mixing together two or more cloud environments. Now, that could be public and private cloud, two public clouds. Maybe you're using something like ExpressRoute or Direct Connect or Direct Peering, which, again, if you're not familiar with some of the cloud terminology, these are the ways that you can get a plug directly into the cloud platforms. So typically through a connectivity provider, you will get something like an MPLS connection directly into your virtual network in one of the cloud platforms. But that's not to say that you can't have a VPN into your public cloud environment. Pretty much all of the public cloud platforms I can think of allow you to establish a very standard IPsec VPN from your on-prem environment into public cloud. So it's a far more convenient, cheaper, albeit slightly slower, more latent connection than one of the dedicated ones. But that is a connection into public cloud from private cloud, i.e. hybrid cloud. So it might be that a lot of you are using hybrid cloud without really being aware of it. So it's nothing to be afraid of, let's say. So let's take a look at one of the Checkpoint architecture diagrams. Now, this might be a bit complex. It's not, I promise. So let's look at some of the components where we can help to secure these types of environments. So starting in the bottom right, on-premises and in the data center, it might be you've got one of our newer appliances, which are kind of similar to the icon that we've got here, a nice black and pink color. If they're slightly older, it might be blue and white. If they're older still, it'll be a fetching gray with maybe a Nokia or a Crossbeam logo on it. It doesn't matter. These are the offerings that most of Checkpoint's customers are familiar with, our firewall offerings in their physical form. It could be that you're running an open server. To us, it doesn't really matter, and I'll cover why shortly. Then we cover private cloud. So private cloud is the same technology again, whether it's Checkpoint Security Gateway or the management component, doesn't really matter. Both are viable. We support that in private cloud as well. So private cloud being one of the software-defined network-driven environments. I guess you could argue that it's an open server environment as well, where you take our software and put it on any piece of tin that you've got available. But specifically in our terms, we cover ESXi, NSX, Cisco ACI, Nuage, and a couple of others as well as private cloud. So if you've got your own environment where you're running security workloads in a private environment, on-prem, in a cupboard, doesn't really matter, not public cloud, that's another area that we're able to cover as well. Then on to public cloud. There are a number of areas that we can cover in public cloud, and I've talked about these in a bit more detail in some of the previous sessions. So if you missed any of those and you're interested in what the specific offerings are toward public cloud, then feel free to go back and review the sessions on securing AWS or securing your cloud. But we cover, amongst others, AWS, Azure, GCP, Kubernetes is in there because we do have technology that covers that, although it's arguable whether that's public cloud, private cloud, a bit of both. Depends on your requirement and where you've got it deployed into. We're also adding in new platforms that we support. So we've got Oracle Cloud support in there as well. AnyCloud's coming and IBM is coming as well. The key to all of it is really that, as I mentioned in the previous session, our name is Checkpoint Software Technologies Limited. So for us to deploy our security gateway software in any of these environments is a fairly easy task for us. And the jump from going from appliances to public, private cloud or hybrid cloud was really easy. And the benefit to customers is that the technology is consistent regardless of the environment that you're running in. So if you have, let's say, some traditional security gateway appliances running in your on-premises world, in your data center, and you decide to expand out into one, two, or more of these public cloud environments, the way that you would approach that for managing your Checkpoint policy is very simple because it's exactly the same. I'll get on to a little bit about what the policy looks like and how it differs between the environments. A bit of a spoiler, it doesn't vary a lot. So the journey from traditional equipment to public cloud is very simple for customers. It gives you a familiar set of tools and workflows when you're moving into these new environments. Whereas if you were using some of the native tools, there might be a bit of a learning curve where you have to learn the nuances and the differences between things like network security groups or security groups and ACLs or the Google tag-based firewall. All of them have got subtle differences, and that's enough to add inconsistencies into your security policies, which again, something we talked about earlier, is consistency is very important in making sure you've got a rigorous approach to security across each of these diverse platforms. So the next up on the diagram are some of the complementary technologies that don't necessarily fall in the realms of network security in terms of firewall offerings. Things like CloudGuard CSPM, AppSec, Cloud Intelligence and Threat Hunting, and the new AppSec offering. These all work across these environments, but it's not what we're going to be talking about today. So if you want to know more about those, I suggest go back and watch one of the previous sessions. So let's have a little look into one of these architectures in a bit more detail. So these all come from our Cloud Security Blueprint, which is something that you're free to download from our website. I think you just provide a few details so we can get in touch with you if there's anything else that you require. But it details how best to architect a public or private or hybrid cloud environment to set yourself up for future expansion, scalable security, agility, and making sure you're not falling foul of any gotchas when you're coming to deploy into these types of environments. So the most common of these, there are a few others in the diagram, in the document that I won't cover today, but the common ones are the single hub architecture and the dual hub architecture. The single hub architecture is the one that we've got on the screen now. Basically, this is probably what's most common to most Checkpoint customers, in that you've got your assets in a particular environment, whether that's a VPC, a VNet, whatever that terminology for your virtual network is in any of the cloud platforms, that's where all your assets live. You don't have peering, you don't have any complex interconnectivity between multiple cloud environments, everything's in one place. Then you've got a very traditional perimeter security approach on the edge of that virtual network function, VNet, VPC, doesn't matter, we'll call it a virtual network. In that case, you've got a single gateway from the Checkpoint side, or you've got a cluster, high availability to be more specific. So in that case, it's the cluster or the single gateway which deals with inbound and outbound connections. Plus, if you want to bring into this a hybrid element, the IPsec VPN between that environment and your data center, your on-premise as well, wherever your existing gateway might be and whatever that gateway might exist on. If it's hardware, if it's open server, if it's private cloud, if it's something like NSX, it doesn't matter. For us, it's another gateway that we manage through the same policy as with the rest of the environment. Some of the drawbacks to this are, with a single gateway or a cluster, you are somewhat limited in the amount of nodes that you deploy. So if you did find that your throughput requirement grew, as it quite often does in public cloud, you deploy and then your services grow, which is great. It means your business is expanding or your presence is expanding. It can be difficult to scale that out horizontally. So that's where things like the dual hub architecture are a little bit more useful. The idea here is that you split your architecture up into a north hub and a south hub. The north hub is intended to deal with inbound connections to your public services. So if you've got an API that you're hosting or a web service or some other public service, that part of the infrastructure, the north hub, can scale out and in elastically to match your loads. And for that, we've got a number of deployment architectures in the public cloud platforms. In Azure, it's a virtual machine scale set, VMSS-based solution. In AWS, we've got an auto-scaling group. In GCP, we've got a multiple instance group. All of them have got their own acronyms and slightly different names. But basically what it is it's a Checkpoint scenario where there are a certain number of predefined metrics that will define how many gateways are required at any time. Let's say you start with 2. If your security throughput requirement grows, then the amount of gateways will increase automatically. If that expansion of requirement is only a temporary thing, let's say it's a sale or a particular seasonal event, and that throughput demand passes, then that workload can contract back in automatically, giving you the benefits of cloud scale and elasticity to make sure you're not paying for resources that you don't necessarily need. Then the South Hub component of this is generally more fixed. So this will be a single gateway or a high availability cluster that deals with a dedicated connection to your on-premises equipment. That might be, again, your data center, your office. It might be a way to access certain backend systems, maybe a management interface, reporting, data, log analytics, something which is a more predictable workload that you can easily say, I want to dedicate a fixed number of cores to this. I don't need to worry about the unpredictable nature of the traffic flow that's coming in. So therefore we can fix it and we can manage that one in a predetermined sense. You've still got the option of scaling up. And what some customers have done recently is they've actually got the scaling solutions for the North and the South Hub, but they've pinned the South Hub to be fixed to a predefined number of nodes or instances for the gateways. That then gives them the advantage of being able to grow by just changing a number from, say, 2 to 3, and rather than having 2 instances in your auto scaling thing, you end up with 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 to cope with that workload. But because the South Hub is designed, or intended at least, to deal with a more fixed workload, you have tighter control over how many resources are in that group. And then, of course, you've got the control over how big those instances are as well. So you've got the option of scaling up as well as scaling out. So what do the policies look like in these environments? And if you're familiar with Checkpoint, the answer is fairly similar to how it has been for the last 10 years or so. I say 10 years, not the 28 years that we've been going, because the policy changed significantly in R80. So what we've got here is a screenshot, or an example rather, of the security policy and how it looks in R80 and above. So you'll see here some familiar looking objects. You've got some hosts, you've got some networks, you've got some application control icons that represent dynamic entities in themselves, like Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Salesforce, all of the common things that are cloud services that will change the IPs and the FQDNs in the background. So we maintain that as a dynamic object. That shouldn't be too new to you. When it comes to dealing with multiple environments, we don't really care where our gateways run. If it's running in Azure or AWS or GCP, Ali, Oracle, one or any of these cloud platforms, or even if it's on physical hardware, it makes pretty much no difference to us whatsoever, because it's just another Checkpoint gateway. You're free to mix and match the components and place them wherever you need them to be. If you want to have your management component hosted in our cloud service, if you want to have it hosted on-prem in a data center, if you want to have your gateways in a data center with some in the cloud, it really makes no difference to us whatsoever. You get the same technology, the same threat prevention, the same logging, reporting, VPN capability that you would get for any size of Checkpoint estate. All we care about is that you define it correctly in the policy, and you go on with managing your policy in the same way that you have with any of your Checkpoint gateways. That's not to say that there aren't benefits to running Checkpoint in public cloud as opposed to traditional hardware, because there are benefits, and these are something that uses what's called the CloudGuard controller. This gives us a level of insight into both public and private cloud environments, and it allows you to create a new type of object, which unfortunately isn't on this screenshot, but follows the same type of approach. So if you imagine in your traditional world, you've got static objects that don't necessarily change very often. So for that, you end up with, like you have in the source column here, you've got some IP address objects, host objects, network ranges, and static ports. That's fine for an environment that doesn't change. But in cloud, things change very, very regularly, and they're quite fluid and dynamic. So for that, we have the ability with CloudGuard Controller to interrogate both public cloud and private cloud APIs. So you can bring in dynamic objects that represent things like tags, groups, VNets, VPCs, and tags in the public cloud side as well. So instead of having a policy that's built up from fixed objects, you can build a business-based policy around roles and privileges and accesses and functions that changes in line with changes in the environment that gateway is enforcing. So for example, if you had a cloud environment, let's say for argument's sake, Azure, you had a virtual machine which was a web server. As part of your deployment process, either manual or through some DevOps process where it gets kind of chucked out at the end of a pipeline, you might associate a tag with that for what the role is for that particular asset. Now, if that was a web server, you might say role equals web server. And your policy, instead of having a fixed role, let's say web server where the IP address is 10.1.1. something, you would just say tag equals web server. And then any object that has the right tag associated to it would inherit the right level of access that it requires to get through the gateway. So you end up in an environment where the people that are building the infrastructure get control passively over the security policy, or not so much control over the policy, but they get the right policy applied to the objects they're creating without having to raise time-consuming help desk tickets that say, I've created a new object in cloud, please can you add in a policy rule for this IP address, for this port, etc., etc., etc. Once you've got that business policy in place, you can write the documentation that says, or I say documentation, it could be a workflow rule in something like Jenkins or GitHub Actions. Anyway, that's a different topic. You would then write a rule that says, if it has this tag, it gets this access. So a bit like having an identity-based policy. So where a user logs into a workstation, they then get a policy that follows them around, regardless of what IP or what host they're operating on. That policy is always relevant to them, whatever they are. So it's a role-based access for public and private cloud objects. And that's something which is really powerful. And a lot of people are starting to use that more now in heavily automated environments where they don't want to be manually changing policy every 5-10 minutes or however many changes they make in their environment. So that leads nicely on to deployment methods and how people are deploying this technology into the clouds. Now, for private cloud, people are quite familiar with this. And when it comes to things like VMware or Cisco ACI, it's a case of deploying an image. That doesn't necessarily come from a marketplace like it does with public cloud, but you would have an OVA or an OVF file. You load that into your private cloud infrastructure, and that's it. That's your checkpoint gateway deployed. You don't have to worry about scrambling around, find those scraps of plastic that some people still use. Worst case scenarios, you would mount an ISO into your hypervisor, build the image, and then deploy it. Although there are better ways to do that. And some of those better ways might be using something like Terraform or Ansible, something which covers both private and public cloud. I personally see a lot of interest from my customers around this, and I've got involved with some fairly interesting projects where customers are starting to use these automated approaches to orchestrate deployment of security infrastructure across the cloud environments. Terraform is a great tool, especially when it comes to orchestrating public cloud, because they have the rigid, repeatable APIs for deploying images. So you can have a very simple Terraform template that once you've plugged in your values like subscription ID, API key, password, and a few basics like IP addressing details, you can have a fully functioning security environment in 5 minutes. And that's one of the demos that I've used internally at Checkpoint for the SE team. Is you get a checkpoint management station, a cluster, subnets, VNets, any security groups that you need, plus some demo web servers, and that's all created with Terraform in about 5 minutes. It's a case of Terraform apply, wait for it, get a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, whatever you need, come back, and it's all ready for you. Very different to getting a server, getting a USB CD drive, putting a CD in. Far better, far more up to date, and I'd recommend, if it's not something you've had a look at least have a play with Terraform to get a feel for some of the benefits it can bring to these types of environments. Ansible as well, slightly different approach to Terraform, and I won't get into the semantics of why they're different, but this is another great tool for automating these types of deployments into either public or private cloud, or even in test environments. If you're running something on your desktop and you find that, let's say you're developing proof of concepts or demos for customers, you can use these tools to very quickly get up to a point where you're ready to demonstrate the product. For production, equally as useful, and the types of things you can do with these are brilliant. In fact, Ansible is something we use in our SE demo lab for provisioning Maestro, one of our other solutions. So automation, I, again, could go off on this one for quite a while. I'll rein that one in, but I'll recommend having a look at those tools if they're not something you're familiar with. Public cloud, as I've said, Terraform and Ansible do play a part in deploying these types of security solutions into public cloud, and they're very, very useful there too. But you've also got marketplace deployments where it's always a driven. If you go to the Azure marketplace or the AWS marketplace, even the GCP, Oracle, each of these cloud platforms have marketplaces, and it makes it very easy to deploy these technologies, especially Checkpoint, into these environments. So if you've already got an on-prem deployment of Checkpoint and you want to, let's say, get a hybrid deployment up and running very quickly, go to the marketplace, deploy a Checkpoint gateway, then you're back in the regular Checkpoint realms of establishing SIC, dragging it into your VPN community, and before you know it, you've got private IPsec communication between your on-prem and your cloud environments without having to worry about any of the native security controls of that particular environment. You can use the tools you're familiar with and get the logging and the reporting and all of the troubleshooting tools that you might need for deploying VPNs in any environment. Then PowerShell, specifically for Azure, there is a CLI tool that I've forgotten here for AWS, which is aptly named the AWS CLI. We support those as well. So we've got a number of examples on the Checkmates community. If you haven't seen it as well, we've got a new site, which I forgot to include a link to. I've been sloppy on my slide, developer.checkpoint.com, which aggregates a number of resources around DevOps, DevSecOps, automation, private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, and all of these sort of developer stroke cloud architect engineer driven resources are aggregated there. So if there's something specific you're looking for, like a Terraform template, an Ansible playbook, first stop should be to have a look there. Then have a look on the forums, lots of active members there contributing, and it's a good place to learn. A lot of the Checkpoint staff are on there as well, so if there's ever a question or a problem you come up against, stop by there, put a post in there, and someone will probably help you out pretty quickly. With each of the automated approaches, most of these are API driven, and this is a big change for Checkpoint, at least since R80 and above. We've pretty much got API coverage across all of the portfolio now. So if you want to create new rule bases, policy rules, objects, if you want to interact with Clish or the Gaia API to modify interfaces, routes, host names, anything that you would normally do from SSH or a serial console, we've got APIs to manage pretty much every part of the Checkpoint technology that you would need now, which opens up a lot of interesting integration possibilities outside of Checkpoint. So for example, if you wanted to integrate your help desk or ITSM service management tool with Checkpoint to automate creating rules off the back of service requests, we can do that. And it's something that we've got a number of examples again on Checkmates and the developer site to cover. So again, if automation is interesting to you, have a look at the APIs, because it might be that something you've been doing the old traditional way with Smart Console is it offers a lot of potential to be automated and handled more efficiently and more effectively in a repeatable manner. So with that, I think I'm finally done talking for the day. So with Checkpoint, we offer a number of new approaches and new tools to help you achieve consistent security policies, whether we're talking about public cloud, private cloud, a combination of both, looking at hybrid, like we've covered today in some of the architectures. Importantly, and more interestingly for me, is the automated side of things. If you want to deploy this technology in as hands-off fashion as you possibly can, speak to us, let us know, speak to Bytes, and we'll all be more than happy to help you develop an automated approach to working with this security. I think that's me done. Thank you for listening. Any questions, I'd be happy to pick them up on the panel, especially if they're around APIs or automation. That's kind of my thing at the moment.
Thanks very much. Just going to see if we have a question or two through before we move on to the next session. Just waiting to see through. In fact, I do have a question that's been posed, and one that we've often been asked as a reseller, because we've seen is that I guess that agnostic party that can talk about why people should consider various different things. And one that comes up a lot and has been reiterated today from another customer is, given that there are a lot of services already available in AWS and some of those other cloud platforms, why is it that we're urging customers to consider third-party solutions?
Straight in with the tough questions. So you might consider that coming from a vendor, my answer might be a little bit biased, but what we get from a lot of the cloud providers and the cloud partners is the idea of being better together. The cloud platforms offer a broad variety of services, and they are brilliant services, and they are very good at what they aim to achieve. But what they don't give you is a dedicated focus on a particular area. So for us at Checkpoint, our focus for the 28 years that we've been going is security. The services from the public cloud platforms, they do offer some security, but in a lot of cases, they are aimed at people who have nothing and want somewhere to start. And we find in particular customers that have started with some of the native controls, they outgrow them quite quickly and want to have the more granular control, the better levels of reporting, and the more advanced threat prevention that we can offer. So it's not a case of we're better, they're better. It's more about using the appropriate tool for the job. And if a customer does find that they've outgrown the platform native tools, we're there to help them achieve that next level of security.
So I guess my question on that would be that the native tools are designed to give people an element of understanding, but the reality is that they need to be considering why they're putting those together and the wider picture. Certainly, would you say that's obviously much more important for multi-cloud? But multi-cloud is where they want to spend most of their time considering those third-party tools and the various different benefits of that?
Yeah, definitely. So it comes down to each platform has a number of tools and services and ways to address certain problems in that, not problems, but certain challenges in that particular platform. If as a customer you choose to take on 1, 2, 3 or more of the public cloud platforms, then you get that many tools, services and approaches to address the problems in that platform, which you as a customer have to take on as point solutions. Taking on a tool such as Checkpoint, which is consistent across each of those platforms, gives you some uniformity to your approach and allows you to achieve more easily consistent controls across the environments. So for example, in the security policy screenshot that I had, you've got a collection of rules. Those rules can be applied to any environment where you've got a Checkpoint security gateway. So you don't have to worry about whether it's a security group or an ACL or an NSG, what the behavior of those NSGs are. It's a Checkpoint security rule. You know how it behaves, you know how to apply it, and you know how to view any traffic that might hit that particular rule. It's a consistent control that your teams are already familiar with. So as aside from that, people who do have traditional networks that do have Checkpoint find that having it in public cloud gives them a certain level of comfort because they are familiar with the tool and what to expect and how to use it. When you deploy that in public cloud, it's nothing new for them to learn. So there's no learning curve of picking up some of the cloud technologies.
That's a good message, because I'm just looking at the current poll results, and as I can see, there's obviously a good mixture in terms of those saying, public cloud 31%, private cloud 8%, both 61%. So there's obviously some clarity to be gained there, and control to be gained there by adopting those kinds of pieces. We did have one other question, and that is that if you have Checkpoint and CloudGuard, do you need anything extra to apply it to your on-prem cloud? CloudGuard being used for off-prem Azure.
Off-prem Azure? No. So I think if this question is around if you've got physical gateways and cloud gateways running in a bigger mix of environments, no, you don't need anything additional. There are some considerations around where you would send your logs and if you've got connectivity into that environment, but that's not a different requirement to how it would have been in the traditional network. If you've got cloud-based management with cloud-based gateways, that's fine. If you've got on-premises management with cloud gateways, that's fine as well. Provided there's IP connectivity between the components, it makes no difference to us whatsoever.
Excellent. Thanks very
Very
much.
simple.
No, I was just going to see if we had any other questions coming forward. I know we're moving on to the next one. We'll just give one more moment for there to be if there are any other questions. But it's good. I think the key thing from that perspective, from the checkpoint side of things, is that as long as they're asking the right questions, they can obviously move forward to adopt various different elements of that cloud posture, security from checkpoint, without having to add as much as they think. It's actually the controls are already there. They just need to understand how to use them appropriately. So, as I understand it, there are no more questions at this stage, but I think that's a good thing because we need to move on to the next section of the session. So, thanks once again. We'll obviously come back and have another chat at the end. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much.
So, without further ado, we'll be moving on to James from Okta to talk to us a little bit more about the stance from there. James.
Hello there. Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for all tuning in to listen in. We'll be going over a few different things in a second that I'll take you through, but to introduce myself, first of all, I am James. I am an Alliances Solutions Engineer here at Okta, mainly based with our partners here in the UK, but providing that technical assistance and any opportunities they are bringing in that we can work on in that perspective of things as well. So to run through in terms of what we'll be covering today, we're going to be looking at this from a perspective of hybrid and multi-cloud, as well as looking at it from a hybrid IT approach, but at the same time looking at it from an identity point of view. So to run through what we'll be going through in the slides ahead, we're going to be going over that hybrid IT overview, how that applies to you within your own organizations. We'll then be looking at how Okta actually focuses in on this particular area, the different solutions that we have in our own portfolio, how these actually apply to that hybrid IT that you may have within your organization, followed up by looking at workforce identity and how it should be done and how it can be done using what Okta can provide within its solution set. And then finalizing there around how we can implement access management for your identities in your organization for hybrid IT. But before we move on, I do want to run a quick poll just because I'm a very curious person. I'm always very interested to hear how this actually applies to different organizations out there. I believe there should be a poll appearing in front of you right now, and it should be asking you roughly how much of your infrastructure or your resources is actually on premise. And we'll give you a bit of detail on that in a second as to why I'm asking that. So just give you a few seconds to actually get those answers in. Great. Okay, cool. So from what I've seen and what I've been told on the results, you very much do feed into the results that we have also obtained from other studies that have been made in reports. Now, this is actually a number that's been fed from a report in 2019. A 2021 report actually raises this number from being 69% in hybrid organizations at the moment to actually being 82%. Now, this can be varied between different organizations. Some organizations are purely cloud, some have a very much cloud first initiative, while some are very much on-premise heavy as well. However, we are seeing and have witnessed a massive shift towards cloud solutions, especially over the last year, as we've all of it experienced. And there are a number of different reasons for this. So let's take a look at why those are and how they actually apply as to what we're talking about today. So, as you're probably familiar with, when it comes to those cloud services that you may actually be using, there are a few different reasons why we are moving towards these. And you could say that it's a no-brainer when we look at some of the reasons why we would move towards a cloud-based solution. It's easy to subscribe to. There are some more modern solutions out there which are very new to the market. It's a pay-as-you-go, so you can only have to use the licenses that are required when you actually need them, amongst others out there too. But I want to bring this back down to earth because you all said earlier, or a majority of you said earlier, that you are a hybrid IT approach within your organization. So why is that? And if we look at this in a bit more detail, you can see here using what we call our on-prem stickiness meter as to why this is the case. There may be solutions that you're using in-house that have been made for a bespoke approach within your organization to solve a particular problem that may not be available in the market. And very much when we compare this to the same sort of scenario with mainframes in the past, on-prem will play its part for a long time in a lot of organizations. So we need to be able to enforce security and reduce that IT friction in these legacy areas too. And this is before we look at other areas, which we'll discuss later, such as the shadow IT, when that comes into scope, and how we can manage the access to resources that are potentially managed by other departments or other areas of your business. The old approaches that we can look at here for hosting some of this on-premise infrastructure that may be using or applications may include those bespoke applications that I mentioned earlier. And these bespoke applications may be standalone in terms of what they're providing, but alongside these, there will also be those user stores or those databases that we're going to be using with those to make sure we're providing access to the correct users. And already when we see a diagram later on, we'll start to understand how this makes things rather complex when we're actually looking to manage the access our users have in multiple areas, especially when we're looking at a cloud-based approach and then looking over to the on-premises for all of our applications as well. So how do we transform the access experience for both your cloud and your on-premise infrastructure? How does Okta fit into this all? So let's have a look at how we can do this. Well, as you can see on the slide right now, we provide a platform to solve all of your identity use cases. Now, you can see on here, there are a number of different audiences. There are a number of different variables that can be included in the identity of a particular user, but there's also many different resources which we would access on a day-to-day basis. This varies from those SaaS-based applications, those custom applications, those on-premise applications, and that's before we look at things such as our infrastructure, which may also be running in the cloud or on-premise. All those databases, those containers that we're running microservices in. And again, that's all before we look at the devices that we're actually using to be able to access these resources, those workstations, those mobile devices. What network are we actually running it from? Well, all of this comes together and provides that middle layer there for the Okta Identity Cloud. And if we go into this in a little bit more detail as to where I'm going with this and how Okta can provide a solution for all of your challenges that you are currently facing. So what you can see here is all of our platform services. These are what makes it possible or make it possible for forming our portfolio of solutions to solve all of your identity challenges that you may be facing. And as we can see here, this is our portfolio. It's very wide, it's very broad. There's a lot of different solutions in there to solve many different use cases that you may be facing. There is a modular approach here, so you don't buy all. You can look at using just one just to solve one particular challenge. But as you can see, there are two big areas that we focus on. The first of which being customer identity. Customer identity impacts all of our lives on a daily basis. Even if you are a customer or using a social network, you are a customer of that particular service. So when you go to authenticate, you are authenticating to obtain access into that platform to make changes to your own profile or maybe change the service that you are actually being provided by them. Now, that's a massive conversation here as to what we're looking at in that customer identity area. What we are going to be looking at in more detail today is the workforce identity. Now, in 2009, when Okta actually was born, shall we say, born in the cloud, we started off very much as a single sign-on based organization, providing single sign-on to organizations out there so they can have a seamless end user experience for when accessing those applications. We still very much provide that service today, but as you can see, we have grown massively in the last 10 years at least, and last 20 years, well, last 15 years, shall we say. I can't even count how many years we are now, 11 years, 12 years. So there are a number of different solutions that you can also see here in our portfolio. And the spine of this all is provided by that universal directory. Now, I'm not going to go through every single solution here that we have in this portfolio, but to name you four pillars that as we see it, the single sign-on based approach is one of them. The universal directory is another. This is where we can collate all of your identities, all of your different attributes and pieces of information stored on you as a particular user in one centralized database, that being the universal directory. This is what gives us that spine to be able to then feed out to those different applications and those different directories that you may be working with, allowing a flow of information in a bidirectional manner. We can then look at this from a further side of things. So we can look at how do we actually provide access to our end users? Well, this is where the lifecycle management aspect of Okta's portfolio comes in. It extends vastly into advanced lifecycle management, which allows you as an end user to automate absolutely everything. But at the end of the day, the initial objective of lifecycle management is to ensure that your users have the correct access on the first day that they start. And then we ensure we're not ending up with orphaned accounts when they leave the organization. So covering off that whole JML process. I mentioned earlier on about that single sign-on. This isn't just for cloud applications that we can provide you that single sign-on experience. Using Access Gateway, we can provide that single sign-on experience and replicate that across to your on-premise applications that you may use within your organization. And you know what? If you're providing this seamless experience to your end users for that single sign-on into those applications, you're probably thinking, how do we make these more secure? Okay, we've made them slightly more secure by removing all these additional sets of credentials, which often get our users to replicate passwords amongst, which is not secure whatsoever. So we take that and we use a secure protocol instead, such as SAML, WS Federation, or OADC. And with adaptive MFA, we can use behavior detection here to lock down applications on an app-by-app basis to ensure that when a user goes to access a particular application, that they are who they say they are. But all of this is made possible by one thing in particular, and that's something we're very proud of here at Okta, and that is our integration network. Our integration network at present consists of over 7,000 integrations available out of the box, providing you that single sign-on experience, including to those on-premise applications. And a vast majority of these also provide advanced integrations via APIs, so giving us the capability to actually provision into those applications, as well as pull information down from them on the fly as well. But now what I want to take you through, and what I want you to go with today, or go away with today, is an understanding of how Okta can be implemented for that workforce identity and how it can actually be implemented correctly to solve all of those challenges you're currently facing and make not only your end users' lives easier, but also your administrators as well. And the way we're going to look at this is 3 key steps for workforce identity. The first of which is seamlessly access everything. We want all of our users to be able to access those applications as seamlessly as possible. If their experience they get when accessing applications is not seamless, you're often going to be faced with pushback. And if you're getting pushback, you're not really going to make it far down that road of access management to be able to secure your apps. We then have the reduction in IT friction. It's not just our end users we need to take care of, it's also those administrators. They play a huge part in our organizations in making sure that our end users have the correct access when they need it. So why are we not automating these tasks that they find themselves doing on a daily basis when we can very easily automate it and have it done for us and actually completed closer to the time when a user actually joins the organization? Reduce that attack surface. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a proper implementation of workforce identity if we weren't going to enhance that security at the same time. And that's where we look at that in this third step, where we can apply that behavior detection and potentially make our end users' lives even easier by providing a passwordless approach. And we'll go into that a little bit more detail later on. But firstly, I want to take you through how we can seamlessly access everything. So how do we provide that seamless access to everything? Well, on this diagram here, you're going to see a number of different points and a number of different things are going to appear here. As we can see on the left and working our way to the right, we've got all of our different audiences, all of our different people that work with our organization here. They're the people that determine, or their identities determine what access they should be getting, whether they're an employee, whether they're a contractor, maybe they're a partner we work with, or even our privileged users. We'll go into that a bit more detail later on as to how this actually applies in that hybrid IT implementation. With all of these employees or all of these different partners or whoever that audience may be, we need to be sure and understand the variables that are encompassed into their identity. So what device are they using? What location are they authenticating from? Are they in the office? Are they outside of the office? Are they in a different country to what they normally work in? All of these different variables are continually taken into account using our continual contextual awareness to analyze and provide a unique experience when accessing those applications or resources that you as a end user need to access to do your job. What you'll also see in the middle there is we can provide a completely passwordless experience when accessing these different resources, but we'll go into that in a bit of detail later on. The main thing I want to highlight here is it's not just applications that we give you the capability of having that single sign-on experience into, whether in the cloud or whether they're on premise. It's also those APIs. We can put controls in place here, whether that's within your own organization, those private APIs or those public APIs. We can put that access management in place to protect you and those resources. And then we have the infrastructure, on-premise servers in the cloud, both of which we can provide a single sign-on experience to accessing those and a modern approach to privileged access management by using short-lived certificates rather than conventional passwords. All of which we can do via any device when accessing any resource, whether in the cloud or on-premise. Now, of course, we've looked so far at the different resources that I would want to access as a user. I need to now see how we can actually provide this excellent experience to our end users. So let me take you through what it looks like for our end users that you can provide that access management approach to. Well, here we can see the modern user experience that we provide to every user of Okta. You can see going from left to right again on the left, we can show you how we can provide a completely passwordless experience. And we'll see that later on in how we can enhance that security in step 3. But as you can see in the center and right screenshots, we can provide a modern-based approach to accessing any of those resources you need on a day-to-day basis from any device, with the visibility of knowing what devices your end users are using within that behavior detection. And it doesn't just end there. That modern user experience for accessing applications in the cloud also extends to those on-premise applications. We're here today to talk about that hybrid IT implementation. We haven't got quite there in terms of how it actually fits in with the Okta story, but one key chunk to how we make that possible is one of our solutions, Access Gateway. It's effectively a reverse proxy, giving you the capability of using or covering off that header-based authentication or Kerberos to provide that single sign-on experience into those on-premise applications. And it doesn't just end there. We also give you the capability of having on-premise provisioning there using an agent. So we can provision into those applications if need be, or we can remove those user stores altogether and use the universal directory as your user store for all of those applications, again, centralizing that management for all of your applications for all of your end users. And this is how Okta Access Gateway looks. It's a very simple diagram because it's a very simple implementation in terms of how it can appear in terms of architecture. It uses the Okta Identity Cloud, which is what we authenticate against. We have the Okta Access Gateway, which is essentially a reverse proxy. And as you can see on the bottom right there, this is our infrastructure. These are our resources that are running on premise. This is what we need to give access to. But of course, it's not just the end users. It's also the IT administrators that we need to reduce the friction for. And we have 2 different ways that we can do this. Firstly, I've mentioned it on a couple of different occasions now. We have the universal directory. Let's consolidate all of those different identities from all of your different directories and applications in one central place. That way, we can manage it all from one place rather than having to go into different directories and applications every time someone joins the organization. And then from a user perspective, we can use the universal directory and all of the details and attributes we store on the identity of a particular user to ensure they have the correct access when they join the organization. So we can ensure that they have the correct access on day one and don't suffer any delay in being able to complete their job. And all of this can be done and automated using Lifecycle Management inside of Okta, or even going one step further with advanced Lifecycle Management to automate absolutely everything. So how do these look? What do they actually consist of? I've given you a little bit of an overview so far as to what these solutions look like. The universal directory, think of it as a yellow pages is the way I like to look at it. You go through that different directory, you've got all of your different attributes, all your different users that may be stored within your organization. They can authenticate against universal directory if we have that integration in place. But mainly the key here is to be able to centralize and have a unified identity across all of your different infrastructure managed from one central place, allowing you to feed out to Office 365 or many other cloud applications, as we saw of those integrations earlier, and continue to use that on-premise infrastructure that you may have had before, such as Active Directory, or even those HR systems to drive the changes that happen within your organization. And with the lifecycle management, this is what makes it possible for us to ensure that your users have the correct access on day one. We can automate that whole process, that whole JML, the joiners, the movers, and the leavers. So if someone does move within the organization, the access they had before can be removed and the new access can be provided. With the leavers, we can then ensure that we aren't going to be ending up with those orphan accounts, which we do dread. And then finally, step number 3, how do we enhance this security? Well, we've seen so far how we can remove that friction and make it as seamless as possible for those end users, how we can make the lives of our IT administrators better, but how do we enhance that security? And how do we make our end users' lives easier at the same time? So let's take a look at this. How do we do it? Well, underneath the hood at Okta, we have a risk engine continually running, and this can be applied via access policies for your applications or your dashboard in Okta. With this, we also, with our vast customer network, are capable of taking threat insight into consideration here. So looking at IPs that maybe have tried to gain access to other people's tenants or are trying to do malicious actions against Okta, we can block these globally to protect you from this happening against your tenant. So we're continually analyzing the different actions that may be occurring against other tenants outside there. And with our vast customer base, we can ensure this doesn't happen to any of our other customers as well. Now, with our authorization engine, as well as our risk-based access controls that we can put in place, we can ensure that as a user, you can have that passwordless experience into Okta and to be able to gain access to your applications. But we can also apply MFA onto some applications too. So if you wanted to have one particular application which has critical data stored for your organization, we can apply MFA on this and secure that application further. Or we can apply MFA onto all of our applications and remove passwords altogether. We have a number of different approaches here for how we can do that. And as you can see here on this slide, this is what adaptive MFA looks like for our end users. We have that behavior detection in the background. We've got the capability of looking at the locations they're authenticating from amongst many other variables. But as we can see here, this end user has been unsuccessful in being able to gain access to this particular Okta tenant. Could be the case that we've got a rule in place to prevent access using a proxy, VPN, or even a Tor browser, or maybe they're not in the location they normally work from. So analyzing the risk here, if it's high, we can deny access altogether. So where does this all fit in with hybrid IT access management, probably asking? Well, we've seen so far how this can be applied to our cloud apps, how it can be applied to our on-premise applications, but how does this all fit together? Well, I want to show you a diagram, a very basic diagram here for where Okta actually sits in terms of the use cases here that it's actually solving. So we can see on the left there, the on-premise that we have for those applications and the devices and the different infrastructure we have in place. We also have our cloud apps on the right there. And at the center of this is Okta Identity Cloud. And that gives you the capability of authenticating against one identity provider and then being able to access all of those different services from there. Or we can have those service provider initiated flows too. So when you go to any of those particular applications, you can authenticate against Okta and be sure that those policies that protect you and your users are in place. What we'll also see on the on-premise down below is where we have applied Okta Access Gateway, the reverse proxy that I mentioned earlier for giving us the capability of having a single sign-on experience into your on-premise infrastructure or applications. What we've done here is removed all those user stores. They're no longer required. We could get rid of those and instead using our universal directory to apply our attributes across to those different on-premise applications, as well as our cloud apps or our infrastructure in the cloud or on-premise too. And this is before we look at it from a privileged access management perspective, where we can also provide session management across to those resources in the cloud or on-premise. Now, when we bring this all together in terms of what we've seen today, whether we're accessing our on-premise resources or our cloud resources, you can see here it very much looks like a spider's web. It can be very, very complex, but it doesn't have to be using Okta Identity Cloud. We can simplify this. We can provide your different identities, different access policies, or different resources that they can access automated very easily against their identity that we have stored on them within the universal directory. So we can ensure that they have the correct access at all times to the resources they need to do their job. So that was everything I wanted to take you through today in terms of what Okta is, where workforce identity fits in, that hybrid IT story that we have here at Okta, as well as the many other solutions we have in our portfolio too. So I'll hand that back over to, I think it's Jez.
Thanks very much. There's certainly a very diverse, a diverse set of opportunities for customers to make use of Okta in those different environments. I did actually have a question that came through that's particularly pertinent, I think, for now and in the future, and that is to really understand what Okta's vision is for access management moving forward. And how Okta is going to achieve that. the requirements are ever changing, the challenges are increasing. What's the vision there from Okta?
So our vision at Okta is to enable any organization to use any technology as safely as possible. And as we know, this varies from being on-premise to in the cloud. It could be resources. Technology now is just so vast in terms of its capabilities and where it can be found. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to protect organizations when accessing these resources. But at the same time, our vision is to provide a seamless experience as possible for those end users too. So it may very well be that we want to enhance the security on those different resources. But as we all know, that sometimes doesn't work if end users are going to push back on that. So we need to make it enhanced in terms of that security at the same time as making it as seamless as possible for those end users when accessing it too. So that's why our vision is so vast in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And we're in many different areas. But as you can see here, and in a number of the diagrams I showed, we aim to solve every identity use case that an organization faces.
First thing, always unmute yourself. Another question I had was actually around the challenges that Okta have in getting their message forward, and where customers can probably quite clearly see some of the advantages, but potentially where Okta has been misunderstood. You know, we often see that Stuart Green and Checkpoint are often seen as just firewalls, and a lack of understanding there. What's the biggest misconception around Okta and the challenge you have in bringing that message forward?
I think the biggest challenge can be that we are just a single sign-on company. And as you've seen earlier with the different solutions that we have in our portfolio, we are so much more. If anything, that's just a small crumb of the pie now compared to all the vast functionality we have here at Okta and all of the different use cases that we can solve. But I mean, as we've seen today, there are other areas that I could even talk about in terms of what we provide here. And that is a misconception that we are just single sign-on and we may only particularly aim at cloud applications, which is so not true. We also provide the capability of having that single sign-on experience and the ability to manage those on-premise applications too, just as well as we provide that functionality for the cloud apps that you may use as well.
Yeah, I think that's always been a particular challenge is understanding the misconception of where Okta has been brought in because of the breadth of tools that it actually provides. We've certainly seen a really big uptick in customers looking for various different ways to do that. The other question that I had that kind of brought to mind is just, I guess, to reinforce how Okta are actually enforcing access controls for infrastructure to make sure that anyone who's listening today gets an understanding of how just that other portion of the solution could be applied.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great question. So I know we've really focused in today on really how we provide access to applications, but as we've seen, infrastructure is such a huge part of every organization. And of course, we have a solution that fits in that area too. We provide a modern approach to privileged access management. The solution in question is advanced server access. And rather than acting as a password vault to store the credentials for your different infrastructure or accounts that you may be managing, we actually used a short-lived certificate-based approach for being able to access those different resources. And again, this doesn't just apply to those cloud-based platforms. It's also for your on-premise infrastructure too, whether it's Linux or Windows. So I really can't iterate enough how we don't just focus in on applications. It's also that infrastructure, the servers that we can provide a single sign-on experience into as well, all of which we contain around a zero trust strategy. So always continually looking at where a user has authenticated from in the past, having policies in place to control what factor sequencing we want to have there. So if they need to have MFA when accessing their infrastructure or a different application, we can have it on an application by application basis.
That's good. I think, and the funny thing is that actually segues really nicely into the poll result. Just looking at, I think the question was, tell me how much do you and other end users in your organization hate passwords? So I think we had a 29% really dislike them. We actually had a 0% hate passwords. I think people obviously wanted to add a little bit more juice to the bone here. They are the bane of our lives was the largest one at 57%. and a nice cheeky 14%. But why are we still using passwords? And there's a couple of different ways you can interpret that answer. Actually, one is a very sensible question: why are we still using passwords? Are they the most secure way of looking after architectures and people and identities? What other elements are available to us to do that? So in some ways, it's a good question. I think I heard it in my head as a user asking that question and being a little bit amused about the number and complexity of those. So that's a good segue. James, thanks very much. Thanks very much indeed for that and for answering those questions. I'm going to take the opportunity now to move across to the next portion, which is to think a little bit more about what Bytes can deliver in this area. So, Gennaro, I believe that you might be the man best placed to answer those.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much, Jeremy, and good afternoon to everyone. So Gennaro Miacho here, and just want to start off by saying that today there's definitely been some very interesting topics and content from from both Stuart and James. So thank you guys so much for presenting that. In terms of my piece for today, so before I go into the the main slides. Today what I really want to talk around is, about some of the Bytes offerings that we have and how we are using these to really help our clients in the cybersecurity space. And I suppose most importantly, how we can use these services, to help you guys out. Now, everything that you're going to see here, these are all, Bytes born and bred solutions. These are things that we have, of course, created internally and are, of course, delivered out by, the Bytes security practice. So, there's quite a bit of security expertise that have gone into this, and a lot of these services do touch, various domains and areas within security. I suppose one thing to definitely say up front is that everything that you see here is, free of charge. It is classed as a value add. So these are not, services in the traditional sense of professional services. These are more, value add pre-sales type engagements to really, help you guys, within that journey on cybersecurity. So if we just start off with the Bytes Cloud snapshot, which is of course on screen, if I just go to the next slide here. So I suppose when going through the snapshot, I suppose trying to summarize this as easy as possible is the snapshot assessment really is geared, very much towards cloud-based environments, and we're talking, public cloud environments, so your Azure, your AWS's, and your Google Cloud platforms. And I suppose it's really to address that issue of, the cloud is very easy to spin up resources. We've seen this. It's very easy to create a virtual machine, a virtual private network, add some storage onto that. Very easy. We can, of course, do that in minutes. And therefore, that is also very easy to, or very quick, should I say, to configure. It is also very easy to make mistakes on that configuration. I do it on my test Azure and test AWS account all the time. Is I configure something and then, all of a sudden I've left, ports 3389 open to the world. Thankfully, it's just a test lab, but we definitely do not want to be doing that on any kind of any kind of production instance. So, how did we take this and formulate this into a Bytes assessment? So what we did was we've created an assessment that really looks to evaluate and assess the posture of your cloud environments. And in short, we are looking for those misconfigurations that are putting your cloud environments at risk. Now, the configuration of this is very quick. I think on this slide it says that the setup is within 60 minutes. It's probably more like 30 minutes, but we just wanted to cover our rear ends in terms of timing. So configuration of this, very easy. Effectively, what we do within this assessment is we're establishing a connection into the cloud accounts. We're pulling the metadata based on the configuration of your cloud accounts, and then this is then assessed to identify any of those security risks based on misconfigurations. But also, it takes a look at those misconfigurations and understands is this actually hindering any of our compliance standards? So, how well do we stack up against our ISO 27001, our GDPR, our PCI DSS, et cetera, so it really does give that compliance overview. And in addition to that, we really do gain the visibility of how these resources are connected to each other, what resources are dependent on what, and what resources are misconfigured and causing us a further element of risk. Once this tool / solution is of course implemented, that's, I suppose, one side to the assessment. The other side is actually understanding this information. And as you can imagine, oh, I think lights have just gone off in this room. As you can imagine, these tools pull back quite a bit of information. Some environments are going to be better configured than others. Some, maybe not so. So the real value to this assessment is having a Bytes engineer actually walk through some of the recommendations that have been detected and really give you that advice and guidance in terms of what to do next and how do we bring our cloud accounts up to a very good state of compliance. So Bytes will work with you to understand the information and realize the value of the solution and information that we have at hand. So hopefully that's a good summary of the snapshots. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move on to our CyberSec session. So our CyberSec session is almost on the other end of the spectrum in terms of, instead of implementing a tool and actually going through that information, this is more of a, broader security session that includes both cloud and on-prem. And it really looks to understand our customer requirements in the cybersecurity space. And as you can see on this slide, it does touch quite a numerous different areas of cyber. And this session really is to have an open conversation on each of your requirements that might be based in these areas, but also investigate and explore, the various domains of security and looking at the wider picture and how all of these connect together in order to, provide you that recommendation and that advice and guidance in terms of achieving that roadmap. These sessions are very insightful. If there are areas that you're not necessarily focusing on, we can, definitely, provide an overview in that area, why it's important, what the effect is in the cyberspace, how does that, affect our risk profile. So it can be very much used for, both discovery, but also exploration of certain domains that you're probably focusing on. The way I tend to treat these sessions, or myself and my colleague tend to treat these sessions, is it is an open forum that is based on your requirements and really gives us the chance to provide you that support and that advice and guidance, and allows us to really shine with our capabilities to of course help you guys and find out if we can realistically achieve those requirements and provide advice on solutions and services accordingly. So hopefully, and I suppose that doesn't really do it justice, but I've only got a set amount of time today, but hopefully that starts to give you guys a bit of a flavor in terms of what to expect from one of those CyberSec sessions. Now, the last one on the list is our CIS gap analysis session. This is definitely something that's blown up with a little bit of popularity. And if I just scroll through these animations, so I can just leave this on screen. Now, whilst the CyberSec session is broad, the CIS gap analysis session is also broad, but it has a little bit more structure. It is based on the the CIS top 20s, so very broad in terms of coverage, but definitely has that structure to it, as we are using the top 20 to align to that. And really, this session is it helps us understand the solutions that you have in place, and if these are indeed hitting the mark in terms of the top 20. So what we effectively are doing is a gap analysis, a red, amber, green against those solutions that therefore align to the top 20. And based on that, we can then start providing recommendations and insight in terms of, okay, what areas do we focus on? What solutions do we need to focus on? Is there any options for consolidation? Is there any options for services or extending out these solutions? It's quite a limitless list from there. But I suppose the key thing around this session is it's a non-intrusive session. We're not installing, stuff on your environment that goes out and scans everything and all of that good stuff. So no tools are going to be run on this. It's purely questionnaire based and based off the information that you give us. Now, this is, of course, what a lot of people say a good thing and a bad thing. Running a tool can be a good idea because it's going to pull back a lot of intelligence. At the same time, actually, having to push down a tool to various machines and systems, I think a lot of people are going to be a little bit skeptical of, and then we've got to go through change management and all of that good stuff. So at the same time, it only gives us a subset of intelligence to work with. However, with the sessions that we have run, which is quite a couple now, we've definitely seen quite a number of success stories in terms of helping our customers understand those focus areas, but also providing recommendations and effectively helping build out that roadmap for our customers, so they know where to spend their time, effort, and of course money on. So hopefully that helps, I suppose, paint a picture of the CIS gap analysis session. I suppose just to quickly run through this slide, discovery element is where we collect information off of you guys. We of course then analyze this in the back end, and then we do a consultation session with you to run through the answers that are provided, to start running through those recommendations, and then out the back of that session, we do actually write up a report based on all of the 20 controls and what our advice and guidance is on each of those. So, before I jump into the next session, those are our three, I suppose, key offerings at the moment. There are many other offerings that we have here at Bytes, and there's a lot of offerings here that can of course help you guys. But I suppose following the theme of interactivity that we have today, we're just going to pull up a very quick poll for all of you guys to answer in terms of are any of these sessions of interest? Is this something that you would like to run? Because it's always good to understand this and assist you guys. So I think that might be appearing on screen now. Perfect. So very keen to see your guys' answers from that, and I suppose that's I think that's my part done just about in time. So I think I'm ready to hand back over to Jeremy for the open Q&A session. Thank you so much for your time today, and Jez, I think this is all you now.
All me. I can see four of us sat here, Joe. Very nicely done. Very nicely done. We'll give a little time for some other questions to come through, and make sure that people have had time to digest some of those over the last 10 minutes or so. I did have actually a question that I kind of wanted to point to, I guess, James and Stuart respectively, and that was for me to ask if there was a question that you believe the attendees of today's session should be putting towards their business in order to help them increase the maturity of their hybrid cloud posture. Is there a question you believe that the customers aren't asking themselves or their business more, or is there a question you believe that comes up regularly as a point of reference for them? What question, I'll start with James then actually, what question do you think customers should be asking their business and their teams with regards to improving or understanding more about the security of their environments?
I think you're on mute, James.
Handily had yourself on mute there.
First time I've done that in ages as well. I'm so disappointed. How do we remove the mute button? I think that would probably be the question. So how do we enhance the security within organizations at the same time as making our end users' user experience far more seamless? That's probably a question I would say. How do we achieve that objective?
That does sound like the nirvana, to be fair. How do we improve user experience whilst increasing the maturity of our security posture in a hybrid landscape? Stuart, seems we had the potential nirvana answer there. What question are you potentially posing to customers that you're talking to on a regular day-to-day basis?
Because we've got such a broad portfolio, it varies which particular piece of the technology we're talking about. But going on this session and some of the other ones that we've had today, I think the common question would be, do you know what your public and private cloud estate looks like? Going with the line of thinking that if you don't know what you've got, how can you possibly think about what security controls to put in place to even start securing it? If you don't know that you're using, 1, 2, 5 different public cloud platforms or multiple data centers, then where do you put those security controls? You can't just go out and buy a firewall and hope it fixes everything. You've got to know what you've got, what environment it's in, and what the risks are with each of those environments. So ask yourself, I guess, do you know what you've got?
Very good question. Do you know what you've got? I like that. I think it's a good segue into I guess a next general question. Stuart, I'll stay with you just for a moment if you don't mind for this one. What would then be your best tip for securing hybrid environments or the approach to take?
So again, you may think this is slightly biased, but trying to move towards business-related policies rather than individual security controls. So rather than having a firewall rule for on-prem that governs access here, unless it's on this day at this time, then one in cloud which does something, but only if it's a Tuesday into a particular service. Come up with more generic rules that you can apply to any environment, and then apply that consistently across wherever your networks extend to. So whether that's on-prem or in public cloud, private cloud, mixture of all of the above, try and make sure that if you know what you're trying to achieve and what risk you're trying to mitigate, that's going to help you with a more consistent approach to security across the platforms.
So, General, I have got a little one for you, but I'm just going to ask that similar question to James. So we've had an answer there that's around generating more easily applicable policies at a business level. James, when you're talking to people about, I guess, Okta and identity change as well, what's your one tip coming from an engineer's perspective? What's your one best tip for securing those environments?
You're on mute again, James.
I've done it again. How could I do it twice? Oh, I can't. So, I mean, it's quite a common conversation, as you would expect. And it's such a vast area in terms of where the conversation can actually flow. But generally speaking, we always look at it from a zero trust perspective. Are you making sure that your users, whenever they access any resource, what it is, are who they say they are? Just because it looks or appears that they're in the office, whether that be via a VPN or actually physically in it, doesn't necessarily mean they are in the office and that they say who they are. We need to look at other perspectives here, such as the devices they're using, where they normally work from, looking at patterns or where they've authenticated from the past, and even looking at what applications they generally use. So all of this encompasses into the zero trust strategy that we would position here with Okta. And I think it really does come down to being able to manage or see or have that visibility of all your employees and your resources all in one centralized place. And that's what the universal directory does. It gives you that one universal directory to be able to reach out to every single application and directory you currently work with, but also give you the visibility of it all. Let's see, as you said the question earlier, what do you have as a question to your organization? Well, that's what the universal directory gives you the capability of seeing. It gives you the capability of seeing what your users have. And when they move role, what do they have then? Because they may still have the access they had before, because it's not unusual that I've had conversations with organizations in the past and someone who's been there for 20 plus years has moved between different roles and he's come towards his retirement and he's still got all of the access that he has had in all of those different roles all throughout his jobs and different titles that he's had at the organization when he hadn't done it for like 20 years. So all of that access is just further attack surface that if he decided to one day, he could just do what he wanted to. So it's that visibility that's key to be able to control it for that first.
It's useful because that's actually a challenge that we've been helping customers look at probably for the last 4 or 5 years, just on the traditional network as much as anything else. So visibility is becoming a really common theme here outside of identity. And if I was going to do a really sneaky segue, that's a great thing to be talking about tomorrow morning in the next session, which is going to be talking about shadow IT and the visibility of those applications and people and where they're going. So thank you very much, Gennaro. I'll tell you that was a 6 there that I just scored with that little out. Someone did ask me a question as well, which is a question for Jeremy. That is the most excellent bookcase. Have you read all the books? Well, I'm hoping that the stream is poor enough to sort of make the difference of my green screen, but actually it's a mere mirage. But nonetheless, what I would say is that is a very good indicator of my lack of education and the fact that I've always believed one should keep reading. But alas, it is not a real bookcase. General, I did have one last question before we close. And I think this is pertinent for yourself because you're a very central point of questioning from customers and for Bytes delivering a lot of those areas. And one was that it was about what challenges do you see customers talking to you that have to manage multiple security layers in multiple native cloud solutions, both on-prem and the cloud, and how are we just generically, if you were to use the phrase, how are we or where are we sending people, or where do you recommend people go to help resolve that?
It's always an interesting one because that tends to come up in conversation quite a bit. There's always a 50-50 split of people that want to do defense in depth and have, say, multiple vendors, multiple solutions, and have that security coverage. And at the same time, there's always going to be a lot of scope for things like consolidation, right? There are quite a couple of vendors out there, as we know, that they specialize in one area and then they grow outwards and they cover lots of different areas of security, which is great. But when there's a lot more, when there's a lot of these vendors, it becomes a little bit hard to actually understand, well, who's going to do what, where do we consolidate, where's the strengths, where's the weaknesses, etc., etc. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why something like the CIS gap analysis session has taken off quite a bit here at Bytes, because it really does give that insight, that advice and guidance in terms of, okay, is this solution fit for purpose? Is it hitting the CIS control? But also, do we have a common theme here? Can we actually consolidate some of these vendors? Or maybe it's the other way around. Can we just extend this vendor to cover this requirement over here that we're not hitting? So we're not going out and getting another point solution that someone else needs to manage, and then we're, in a heap of trouble, a couple of years down the line because we've got 50 portals to manage. So I know it was, as you said, Jez, a cheeky segue into some of the services, but I think
pure self-promotion, Gennaro. Pure self-promotion.
Wouldn't be doing my job otherwise. But yeah, I mean, it's something that I always see from my perspective. I'm always going to be. I'm always going to advocate defense in depth. I'm always going to look at the requirements first before the cost, because I never look at the money side, because some of it can be eye-watering and some of it I simply just don't understand. I love the technology, and for me, it's all around, can this technology hit that requirement? And if it does, that's where we, start kicking some ideas around and making that recommendation.
Well, I'm just going to let you know that you've obviously sold a number of those areas very well, Gennaro, and it's, there's a nice strong uptake in the poll for a number of the different areas in terms of identity workshops, cybersecurity reviews, identity assessments, and snapshots. So there's a whole raft of different areas that a number of the customers are looking to take on, and happily, as we clearly indicated, please select all that apply. So there are a few customers looking to fill a few of those questions by actually having those workshops together. And I think from our perspective, bringing us all together today, it is a tough job trying to think of all the different areas that you need to in this very DevOps orientated world. SecOps is an important part of that, and we're desperately trying to catch up with these zero-day network habits that we're forming as customers. We're all consumers in our own right, developed by those winds of change and the speed of change in the market. So just want to say, I think we're pretty close to to hitting the nail on the head of a 4 o'clock-ish finish. Janara, you're a great one for timing. I think we're pretty much there. But all I can say is thank you very much all for coming on this afternoon. I'm glad to see I saw James hit a 2 there on the mute button. So better luck next time. And thanks very much for your contributions throughout the week. I believe that I can quite happily say you are free to go. And I hope to see many more of the attendees tomorrow morning.